Hello friends, welcome back to ClipFlix for another movie recap video. Today we are going to talk about romance and drama movie, titled The Fault in Our Stars from 2014. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. A teen young lady named Hazel Grace Lancaster is lying in the grass gazing up at the stars. She expresses that she accepts we're permitted to decide how to recount miserable stories, and that albeit one can gloss over it and say there's nothing that can't be fixed with a Peter Gabriel song, it's not true. Hazel experiences stage 4 thyroid cancer and is generally seen conveying an oxygen tank with a cannula in her nose for her to breathe. At the command of her mom Franny, father Michael, and her doctor Maria, she goes to a disease support bunch at a congregation called the Literal Heart of Jesus. The individual running it is a man named Patrick, who had testicular cancer growth. Franny needs Hazel to make companions, yet as Hazel says, the main thing more regrettable than gnawing it from malignant growth is having a kid that bites it from cancer. One day when she goes to the group, Hazel bumps into Augustus Waters. During the meeting, Gus gazes at Hazel. Patrick first calls on Gus's friend Isaac, who had a tumor in his eye and now wears a glass, though he is thankful because of his smoking hot girlfriend Monica. When Gus is called on, he says that he has been in remission from osteosarcoma after having half of his right leg amputated. Patrick asks him if he has any fears, and Gus states that he fears oblivion. Hazel shoots this down by saying that eventually, everything and everyone will be gone and forgotten, and if that scares him, he should ignore it. After the meeting, Hazel waits for her mom, and Gus comes out to chat with her. They see Isaac and Monica making out and groping each other, then repeating, always to one another. Gus explains to Hazel that this is their way of saying they will always love each other. He asks Hazel her name and tells her she's beautiful. He then puts a cigarette in his mouth, which upsets Hazel because it has ruined her impression of him. Gus explains that he never lights or smokes the cigarettes he puts between his teeth so as to not give the killing item any power. He invites Hazel to watch a movie. While Gus recklessly drives to his house, he asks Hazel about her cancer story. She tells him through flashbacks that she was diagnosed when she was 13. Hazel and Gus arrive at his home and meet his parents. He brings Hazel to the basement and asks her to tell him her real story, not her cancer story. She claims to be unremarkable, but he rejects that. He gives her a copy of his favorite book based on his favorite video game, Counterinsurgents. Hazel, in return, recommends her favorite book, An Imperial Affliction, which is about a girl that has leukemia, but she tells Gus that it is not necessarily a cancer story. Hazel waits for Gus to call her back and, after a few days, writes him a message after completing An Imperial Affliction. Expresses surprise that the book ends in the middle of a sentence. Hazel excuses herself from dinner to talk to Gus on the phone, but they are interrupted by Isaac crying out the lyrics to a song in the background. Gus invites Hazel over, where he discovers that Monica broke up with Isaac before his surgery. Gus says Isaac is having a psychotic episode, while Hazel says Isaac's reaction to the breakup seems normal. Gus allows Isaac to take out his anger on his basketball trophies. As Isaac destroys them, Gus tells Hazel about the end of the book and she tells him that she wrote hundreds of letters asking the book's author, Peter Van Houten, questions about what happened. After the story, one evening during a telephone conversation, Gus tells Hazel that he tracked down Van Houten's assistant and got a response from a message he wrote to Peter Van Houten. Van Houten thanked Gus for his and Hazel's interest in the novel, and that he has no current plans to write any follow-ups to An Imperial Affliction. Hazel is surprised that it took that one email to get a response. She decides to write her own email back to Van Houten to ask her questions. A few days later, Hazel gets her own response from Van Houten, who also thanks her for her interest in the story, and even invites her to visit him in Amsterdam. Overjoyed, Hazel tells her mother, and while she wants to make her daughter happy, she knows they wouldn't be able to afford it. Hazel later reads the email to Gus, and they stay talking until 1 a.m. Hazel decides it's time to hang up. Okay, Gus responds. Okay, Hazel says back. Gus decides that okay can be there always. Hazel tells Gus about the invitation and Gus suggests asking the genies to grant his wish. Hazel claims that she has already fulfilled her desire to go to Disney World. Gus is disappointed that he used his wish in a cliché. Sometime later, Gus shows up at Hazel's with orange tulips in a basketball jersey designed by Rick Smits, the Dutch basketball player, and then invites her to a picnic in a park with a giant skeleton named Funky Bones, a replica of a work of art by a Dutch artist. Gus jokes that he brought all his romantic conquests here and that's why he's a virgin. He even illustrates it by drawing a circle in the land. While they have their picnic, Gus tells her that he spoke to the genies and convinced them to grant his wish to bring Hazel to Amsterdam. She is excited. Hazel wakes up in the middle of the night having trouble breathing as fluid fills her lungs. Her parents rush her to the hospital, with Gus waiting outside since he is not allowed in. After a meeting with the doctors, they determine that she is physically unfit to travel anywhere in her condition. Feeling discouraged, Hazel does not answer Gus' phone calls and texts. She is sitting in front of a swing. She calls Gus and expresses her sadness. He walks over and they sit on the swing. He tells her that keeping her distance from him doesn't diminish his affection for her. She compares herself to a grenade and one that will explode and destroy everything in its wake. Not wanting to hurt Gus, Hazel decides they should remain friends. Days later, Van Houten's assistant Liedewij emails Hazel to extend the invitation again after learning that they will be traveling to Amsterdam in a week. Hazel calls her mother in, and she admits that she wanted to surprise her together with her father, but they are indeed going to Amsterdam. Hazel hugs Franny and then texts Gus. Gus arrives in a limo to select out up Hazel and Franny, affirming he desires to journey in style. On the aircraft, Gus turns into apprehensive as he has in no way flown on an aircraft before, and he turns into excited when they take off. When Hazel offers Gus a peck at the cheek, Franny reveals them adorable. On their first day in Amsterdam, Hazel and Gus cross a canal and go to a Dutch restaurant, Orangey. Hazel is wearing a pretty blue dress given to her by Franny. Franny is struck by Gus' beauty while smoking, and Gus is blown away by Hazel's beauty. At the restaurant, they are welcomed like Mr. and Mrs. Waters. They have served Dom Perignon for the first time and have fun. They have dinner and Gus proudly declares his love to Hazel, which gives her a big smile. The waiter arrives with more champagne and says the dinner was paid for entirely by Van Houten. The next day, Hazel and Gus go to meet Van Houten. They are greeted at the door by Liedewij. There is unopened fan mail all over the floor. The couple finds Van Houten in his pajamas, drinking scotch. They sit down so Van Houten can answer their questions, but he instead orders Liedewij to put on Swedish rap. Despite the loud rap, Hazel starts to ask her questions, such as the fate of Anna's mother and the Dutch tulip man, but Van Houten only responds with philosophical nonsense. Gus asks him if he is messing with them, and Van Houten makes a rude comment about Gus's cancer. He only gets worse by refusing to answer Hazel's questions and insulting her and Gus's sicknesses. Hazel and Gus storm out. Van Houten asks her why she dwells on these questions, and Hazel just tells him to go fuck himself. Liedewij, shocked by Van Houten's behavior, offers to escort Hazel and Gus to the Anne Frank house. Since there is no elevator, Hazel has to climb all the stairs and up the ladder, which strains her breathing. Hazel and Gus share their first kiss. The spectators, including Liedewij, applaud them. They go back to Gus' room and have sex for the first time. On their last day in Amsterdam, Hazel and Gus have breakfast with Franny before walking alone together. They sit on a bench and Gus tells Hazel that when she was in the ICU, he felt a pain in his hip and got a PET scan. Hazel already knows what he's going to tell her. Gus says the scan lit up like a Christmas tree, and the cancer returned and spread through his body. Hazel puts her head on his shoulder and cries. Hazel, Gus, and Franny return to Indianapolis with Michael picking them up. A few days later, Hazel and Gus hang out with Isaac, who is now completely blind and tells them that Monica hasn't spoken to him since the breakup. To cheer him up, Hazel and Gus buy eggs, and they go to Monica's home and let Isaac pelt her car with eggs. Gus calls Hazel in the middle of the night to ask her to come to the gas station to help him. She drives over there to find him sitting in his car, covered in his own mucus and vomit, with an infection in his abdomen. Hazel calls an ambulance, despite Gus's pleas not to. The ambulance arrives and takes Gus to the hospital. Gus undergoes further cancer treatments until the doctors decide to stop him from chemo. Hazel is now the one who is rejected in her hospital room because she is not part of the family. Now he needs a wheelchair to get around. Hazel takes him to the park with the Funky Bones replica for a picnic. He expresses his desire to have had an impact on the world before his death and his need to live an extraordinary life. Hazel takes offense and tells her that she doesn't need to do all this because she and her parents love her and that should be enough. He says he is sorry and they drink champagne. Hazel joins Gus and Isaac at the church for what is a pre-funeral that Gus wants to witness, since he wants to attend his own funeral. Isaac starts off a eulogy with a touch of humor, but says that if he ever is given robot eyes, he would deny them because he doesn't want to see a world without Gus. Hazel goes up and starts to talk about her love story with Gus. They both say, "I love you," to each other one last time. Gus dies 8 days later. The Lancasters receive a telephone call in the middle of the night to hear the news. Hazel's parents walk into her room, and without a word, she knows what is wrong and begins to cry. A funeral is held for Gus. Hazel and her parents leave, And as the preacher speaks, Hazel is surprised to see Van Houten there. Hazel is called to speak, corrects the preacher saying she is Gus' girlfriend, puts a pack of cigarettes among the flowers on his casket, and gives a new eulogy which she finds more suited to the funeral audience. After the funeral, Hazel decides to go home alone and Van Houten gets into her car. There he discovers that he and Gus kept in touch before his death, and Gus told Van Houten that he could redeem himself by visiting Hazel and answering her questions. He reveals that Anna was based on Van Houten's 8-year-old daughter who died of leukemia. Before she angrily drags him out of his car, Van Houten hands Hazel a letter, which she crumples up and throws away. She drives away. Later, Isaac comes over to visit. He tells Hazel that Gus really loved her. He asks her if she read the letter from Van Houten, which happened to be written by Gus. She realizes that the crumpled letter she threw away in the car is from Gus and not from Peter Van Houten. The letter is a eulogy for Hazel written by Gus, saying that he snuck into Hazel's room in the ICU while she slept, holding her hand, and how he thought about them together. He expresses his admiration for her beauty and personality, and adds that people can choose who hurt them. Gus liked his choice, and he hoped Hazel liked hers. He ends the letter with, "Okay, Hazel Grace?" The film ends with Hazel still lying in the grass and looking up at the stars, replying, "Okay." That is the end of the story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.